At my own dining table in Austin, my son shoved a thick folder of real estate contracts across the polished mahogany surface. His face was stone, his voice cold. "Dad, it's $500,000. Just sign here. You don't need all that money anymore." $500,000. The number glared up at me like a knife. "My name is Howard Whitaker. I'm 72 years old. For more than 4 decades, I worked with these hands that once bled in the Texas sun, laying bricks, pouring concrete, and building homes that still stand today. I built not just houses, but a life, a reputation, a future. I thought I'd built a family too. But that afternoon, staring at the man across from me, I realized I was raising a traitor. Before I take you further into my story, I'd love to pause for just a second and ask you something simple. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Are you sitting at your kitchen table like I was? Or maybe driving home or resting after a long day? I always enjoy knowing where folks are tuning in. It makes these stories feel more like we're sitting together, having a real conversation. Now back to that dining table. My son Ethan had come dressed for the part of a successful young professional. Tailored navy suit, Rolex gleaming on his wrist. The faint cologne of someone who'd been taught appearances were everything. But behind the shine was a desperation that reeked louder than any cologne. Beside him sat his wife, Madison. She didn't even look up at me. Her eyes were glued to the glowing iPad on her lap, swiping through glossy photos of lakeside estates. "Look at this one babe," she cooed. "Infinity pool, marble kitchen, imported chandeliers. Imagine the dinner parties." Then she turned to me with a smile sharper than broken glass. "Isn't it perfect for starting our family?" That word landed like poison. I sipped my coffee, slowly setting the cup down with deliberate calm. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Ethan didn't blink. He tapped the papers with one manicured finger. "Co-sign the mortgage. Your credit score, our dream house. Win-win." The audacity was like a slap. I raised this boy. I taught him that a man's word is worth more than his paycheck, that a dollar earned through sweat is worth 10 handed over in pity. And here he was in the very dining room where I'd once patched his scraped knees, demanding I risk everything I'd worked for so he could play house in a mansion. "You make $102,000 between you," I said, flipping to the income page. "And this mortgage, it's nearly $5,000 a month. How do you plan to cover that?" Madison rolled her eyes, her designer bracelet clinking against the table. "Howard, you've saved enough. What good is money if it doesn't buy your son a future? Families invest in each other. That's what grandparents are supposed to do." Grandparents. I'm not even a widower 2 years. And already I was being written into the role of banker, babysitter, benefactor. I slid the papers back across the table. No. Silence stretched like a stretched wire. Madison's iPad clattered as she set it down. Her voice lost its sweetness. "Excuse me, no," I repeated. "I won't co-sign for a house you can't afford." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Dad, are you serious right now, after everything we've done for you?" My laugh was humorless. "Everything you've done for me, like what?" Madison shot to her feet so fast her chair screeched against the hardwood. "We visit you. We include you in our lives. We make sure you're not some lonely old man. Visiting isn't currency," I said quietly. Her eyes filled with those on command tears I'd seen too many times. "So that's it. You'd rather hoard your money than see your own son happy. Some father you are." Ethan finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my chest tighten. Not the boy who once followed me through job sites carrying my tool belt like a badge of honor. Not the young man who once said, "Dad, you taught me everything I know about hard work." No. What I saw was resentment, entitlement. A stranger who saw me not as a father, but as a walking vault. "Dad," he said, his voice low and venomous, "you owe us this." Those 5 words hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. I owed them. I thought of the nights I worked double shifts to pay for Ethan's college tuition. The wedding reception I funded when their credit cards maxed out. The down payment on the BMW Ethan drove into my driveway that very afternoon. And now, according to my own flesh and blood, I owed him more. Madison snatched her purse, fury sparking in her eyes. "Come on, Ethan. We're wasting our time here." He hesitated, and for a split second, I prayed some trace of the son I raised would surface. But then he gathered the contracts with shaking hands and spat the words that sealed the betrayal. "You'll regret this, Dad." The door slammed so hard the windows rattled, and just like that, my house, my sanctuary, felt smaller, emptier. I hadn't lost my son to death. I hadn't lost him to distance. I had lost him to greed. And I knew one thing: if they wanted war, they had just declared it. When the door slammed and the echo finally faded, I just sat there at the table, staring at the spot where those mortgage papers had been. The contracts were gone, but the weight of what had just happened stayed heavy in the air. My coffee had grown cold, a thin skin forming on the surface, but I didn't lift the cup. I couldn't. My own son had looked me in the eye and said I owed him $500,000. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under my weight, and for the first time in a long while, I felt old. Not in body, but in spirit. I thought back over the decades, 40 years of working construction, pouring concrete, laying bricks, building houses that still stand across Texas. I wasn't a rich man by luck. I was a man who had worked every dawn to dusk shift I could find, squirreled away every dollar I didn't spend, and lived through lean years so my children wouldn't have to. Every dollar in my savings was soaked with sacrifice. I could trace each one back to a story. Nights I came home so exhausted, I fell asleep in my truck before even walking inside. Knees that ache every time the weather turns cold. A back that never stopped reminding me what decades of lifting steel beams will do to a man. Those dollars weren't just money, they were my life in tangible form. But to Ethan and Madison, they were numbers to be moved around on a page. Just leverage for bigger dreams, marble countertops, imported chandeliers, and a mortgage they couldn't possibly afford. I rose slowly and wandered into my study. The walls in there told the story of a life I'd once been proud of. Family photos framed in oak, my late wife Margaret. Her smile as warm as the Texas summer sky, holding Ethan as a baby. Another of Ethan at 10 years old, beaming as he held up the crooked birdhouse we built together in the garage. He was so proud of it. He had no idea back then what a dollar meant, but he understood pride in work. And then the wedding photos, Madison in a dress that cost more than my first pickup truck. I paid for that too because Ethan said he couldn't bear to disappoint her. I stopped in front of Margaret's picture, my fingers brushing the frame. She'd been gone for 2 years now, and I still reached for her every morning in bed, only to feel the emptiness beside me. She'd been my compass, my reason to keep steady when life pressed hard. I could hear her voice even now, calm and practical. "Howard, don't let anger eat you alive. Stand firm, but stand with grace." My throat tightened, and I lowered myself into the old leather chair in the corner. The leather had cracked over the years, molded to my shape just like life molds a man. I reached for the Bible that had sat on my desk since Margaret gave it to me on our 20th anniversary. Its cover was worn soft, its pages marked with notes and underlines from decades of searching for wisdom. I held it in my lap and closed my eyes. Lord, I whispered, you've carried me through harder storms than this. Don't let bitterness take root in me. Show me the difference between helping and enabling. Give me the strength to stand firm even when my own flesh and blood turns against me. The room was still. Only the tick of the clock on the wall answered back. But in that stillness, I felt something settle deep in my chest, a steadiness, a reminder. My worth wasn't measured by how much I gave away. It was measured by whether I lived with integrity. I opened the Bible at random, and my eyes fell on a verse I had underlined years ago, "The truth shall set you free." Truth. That was what I had. Ethan and Madison could lie, they could manipulate, they could spin stories for the neighbors and post sob tales online, but the truth was on my side. I closed the book and looked once more at the empty dining table. My heart ached. Of course it did. I'd lost my wife to death, and now in a different way I felt I was losing my son to greed. But beneath the ache I felt something harder, stronger steel. If Ethan and Madison wanted to treat me like nothing more than a wallet with legs, they were about to find out that this old man still knew how to fight. I had spent a lifetime solving problems, one brick, one beam, one nail at a time, and I wasn't about to let my life's work get ripped out of my hands by entitlement and manipulation. Not today. Not ever. The morning after I said no, my phone began buzzing before the sun was even up. Ethan's name flashed across the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then came another call. And another. By the fifth, I answered. Dad, his voice cracked, but not with sincerity, more like rehearsed desperation. Do you have any idea what you've done? We've got 48 hours before we lose the house. In the background, I could hear Madison, sharp and insistent. Tell him about the inspection deadline. Tell him we'll lose our deposit. My jaw tightened. What deposit? $25,000, Ethan blurted. All gone if you don't step up. $25,000. I could almost see Margaret's face in my memory, how she'd shake her head and say, Howard, don't you dare let them trap you. I didn't agree to this house, I said firmly. I won't be bullied into financing your mistakes. Silence then, Madison's voice suddenly soft and syrupy. Howard, please. This isn't just about us. Think of your future grandchildren. Don't you want them to have a home to grow up in? This is family. Family. They kept wielding that word like a weapon. By noon, my voicemail was full. Each message was more desperate than the last. Dad, we can't believe you'd choose money over us. Paul, I was just upset earlier. Let's start over. Please, you'll regret this, old man. Don't come crying to us when you're lonely. I didn't delete a single one. I wrote down the times, the dates, the exact words. If they wanted to play games, I would keep score. But they didn't stop there. By evening, my sister Margaret called, her voice laced with confusion. Howard, what's going on? Ethan just called me in tears. He says you refused to help them with their first home. That's right, I told her. But why? They're young, they need a hand. Did he tell you it's a $500,000 house, that they already have more debt than income, that they want me to risk my retirement to keep them living above their means? Silence on the other end. He didn't mention that. Of course he hadn't. Within hours, the calls kept coming. My brother Thomas, an old friend from church, even the neighbor down the street. Each one carried the same story: poor Ethan and Madison abandoned by a selfish father who'd rather hoard money than see his son happy. It was coordinated, calculated. At the grocery store the next day, the cashier who usually asked about my garden avoided eye contact. At Murphy's Hardware, Tom Murphy rang me up without the usual friendly chatter. People I'd known for years suddenly looked at me like I was a miserly old man with a heart of stone. That's when I learned Madison had gone public. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, showed me her phone at the mailbox. "Howard, I don't know what to make of this, but look." On Facebook, Madison had posted a long, dramatic essay, "Some fathers forget what family means." While we struggle to start our life, he sits on his pile of money watching us drown. The comments were brutal. Disgusting. How can a man abandon his own son? Money doesn't buy love, but apparently it can buy selfishness. Shame on him. I thanked Mrs. Chen and went back inside. My hands trembled as I set my groceries down. It wasn't just between me and my son anymore. They were poisoning the well, turning neighbor against neighbor, family against family. But here's the thing. Lies are flashy, but truth is steady. And I had truth on my side. I opened my notebook and began transcribing every message. Every voicemail, every manipulative text, every sob story passed along through relatives. I took screenshots of Madison's posts and Ethan's performative photos, his Rolex glinting on his wrist, her designer handbags tagged with luxury brands. They claimed poverty, but their lifestyle told another story. The pressure campaign was meant to break me, to shame me into signing those papers. Instead, it forged my resolve. They thought they were playing chess, moving pieces around the board. But I'd spent a lifetime fixing problems, one pipe, one brick, one nail at a time. And what I knew better than most leaks only get worse if you ignore them. You've got to trace them to the source and shut off the supply. I closed my notebook and whispered to myself, "All right then. If this is the game you want to play, let's see how long you last." By the end of that long week, my phone felt more like a weapon than a lifeline. Every time it buzzed, I knew it wasn't good news. Ethan begging, Madison guilt-tripping, cousins, neighbors, even old friends chiming in, all carrying the same rehearsed story about how I was failing my family. I stopped answering. I stopped explaining. I just started documenting. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, open the same table where Ethan had slammed down those mortgage papers days earlier. I wrote down the names of every caller, the times, their exact words. Then I pulled out my laptop and began saving screenshots, Madison's Facebook sob stories about being abandoned, Ethan's carefully posed photos, showing his tailored suits and expensive watch. Side by side, the truth was undeniable. They wanted the world to believe they were victims, but their own vanity betrayed them. Just 3 days after telling half the town they couldn't afford groceries, Madison had posted a picture from a spa resort in Scottsdale, champagne glass in hand. That was all the evidence I needed. I leaned back in my chair, pen tapping against the notebook. For 72 years, I had built my life on simple rules: work hard, tell the truth, don't spend what you don't have. And I wasn't about to let 2 entitled children rewrite those rules in my final chapters. Let me pause here for just a second. If you're still with me, still walking through this story alongside me, just type 1 in the comments. It lets me know you're here listening, and it honestly makes telling this story feel a little less lonely. When I look back at that moment, I realize it was the turning point. See, for days I had been on the defensive, trying to make sense of their manipulation, trying to explain myself to people who'd already been fed a one-sided tale. But that night, staring at the evidence laid out in neat lines on my desk, I made a decision. I wasn't going to defend myself anymore. I was going to fight. I thought about Margaret, my late wife. She had a way of cutting through nonsense with a single look. If she'd been there, she would have put her hand on mine and said, "Howard, don't waste your breath on lies. Stand in the truth. Let it speak for you." And that's exactly what I plan to do. So I organized everything. Every voicemail transcribed word for word. Every text message saved and printed. Every social media post captured with timestamps. Even my conversations with relatives who'd called me to plead Ethan's case. I noted their words carefully because patterns don't lie. The more I worked, the calmer I felt. What they thought would break me was giving me strength. They assumed I'd fold under pressure, that I'd cave to embarrassment, that I'd sign away my savings just to quiet the noise. But instead, every manipulative word they spoke became another brick in the wall. I was building a wall of truth that would stand taller than their lies ever could. And I'll tell you something I learned right then. Being 72 doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've seen enough storms to know which ones will pass and which ones you've got to stand and face. By midnight, my desk was covered in neatly stacked papers, evidence of every angle of their scheme. I sat back, folded my arms, and for the first time in days, I smiled. "All right," I said out loud to the empty room. "If they want a war, I'll give them one. But it won't be fought with shouting or tears. It'll be fought with facts. And I've got plenty." The house was silent, but inside me something shifted. No longer the hunted, but the hunter. They wanted to play games with my money, my reputation, my faith. They'd soon learn that I wasn't just some old man they could corner. I was their father, yes, but I was also a builder. And I knew how to tear down what was rotten and shore up what was worth saving. This was only the beginning. It was a Tuesday morning when the knock came. The mailman stood on my porch, holding a thick envelope marked "Certified Mail." My gut clenched the moment I saw the return address, Brennan and Cole Attorneys at Law. I signed for it with steady hands, but my heart pounded like a hammer against my ribs. I carried it to the kitchen table, the same spot where Ethan had once laid out those mortgage contracts, and set it down. For a minute, I just stared at the envelope as if by looking hard enough, I could change what was inside. Finally, I tore it open. The words blurred at first, but then sharpened one by one. Complaint for damages, Ethan Whitaker and Madison Whitaker versus Howard Whitaker. Amount demanded $500,000 plus costs and attorney's fees. $500,000. They hadn't just threatened. They had gone through with it. I read each accusation, my stomach twisting tighter. They claimed I had made repeated verbal promises to assist with major purchases. They claimed I had created reasonable expectations of financial support. They claimed my sudden refusal was proof of cognitive decline, that I was too old, too confused, to remember the commitments I had supposedly made. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Elder abuse. That's what they were accusing me of, by omission, turning the law on its head to paint me as the abuser when they were the ones trying to strip me of everything I had. I laid the papers flat on the table and whispered to the empty room, "So this is what my son thinks of me." The anger was there, hot and sharp, but underneath it was something colder, resolve. I picked up the phone and called Clara Mitchell, my attorney for more than a decade. Clara had helped me set up my will, my retirement accounts, the trust for my late wife's medical care. If anyone knew my financial situation inside and out, it was her. "Howard," she said, as soon as she answered, "What's wrong? You don't usually call this early." "They've filed suit," I said flatly. "$500,000. Silence for a beat. "Then bring me everything, every message, every voicemail, every screenshot, and bring the complaint papers. We'll sort this out." An hour later, I sat in her office, the lawsuit spread across her polished desk. Clara leaned over the documents, her brow furrowed. She was in her late 50s, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who'd built her career on being underestimated until it was too late for the other side. "This is aggressive," she said finally. "They're not just asking for money. They're trying to undermine your credibility. The claim of cognitive decline is especially telling. They'll argue you promised them help, but forgot. I never promised them a thing I said. I believe you, but courts care about evidence, not belief. We'll need to show two things. First, that no promise was ever made. Second, that Ethan and Madison have a clear pattern of financial manipulation. That pattern will destroy their credibility." I pulled out my folder pages of handwritten notes, printed texts, screenshots, even transcripts of voicemails. Clara flipped through them slowly, and I could see the corner of her mouth lift in approval. "Howard, in 30 years of practice, I've never seen a client this organized. This is excellent." I nodded grimly. They thought I was just some old man they could corner. "But I've been documenting since the first phone call." She leaned back, tapping her pen against the folder. "Good. Then here's our plan. We file a formal response denying all their claims. We counter-sue for defamation, harassment, and abuse of process. We demand full discovery, financial records, social media, credit card statements. If they're living beyond their means, we'll expose it. And we'll subpoena witnesses, neighbors, friends, even the bank officer who turned them down." For the first time in days, I felt a surge of control. Clara closed the file and looked me straight in the eye. "Howard, this won't be easy. They've chosen their battlefield, but you've got the truth. And in my experience, truth has a way of winning if you're willing to stand firm." I thought of the years Ethan spent by my side as a boy, learning to use a hammer, learning to balance a level, learning what it meant to do a job right. Somewhere along the way, he'd traded those lessons for easy shortcuts and Madison's hunger for luxury. I met Clara's gaze and said the words with steel in my voice, "I won't settle. Not a penny. We fight this all the way." She nodded once firmly. "Then let's get to work." That night, after leaving Clara's office with the lawsuit tucked under my arm, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't even bother heating up dinner. I went straight to my study, the one room in this house that always felt like mine alone. I set the lawsuit down on my desk, turned off my phone, and sat in the quiet. The weight of it pressed on me, not just the financial risk, not just the humiliation, but the betrayal written into every line. To read my own son's name at the top of a legal document suing me for $500,000 was like looking at a tombstone. Something had died between us. I sank into my leather chair, the same one I'd sat in for decades, and pulled open the drawer where I kept Margaret's Bible. Its cover was worn soft from years of use. I laid it on my lap, ran my fingers along the gold-embossed letters, and whispered out loud, "Lord, I don't know why my son turned out this way. I don't know how the boy who once followed me around job sites with wide eyes has become the man who drags me into court. But I know this much: I can't walk into this fight alone. Give me strength. Keep me clear-headed. And don't let me lose my dignity even if they strip everything else." The room was still. Only the sound of the clock ticking on the wall filled the silence. Yet in that stillness, something came over me, a steadiness like bedrock under shifting ground. I flipped the Bible open at random, as I've done 100 times before. My eyes fell on a verse underlined long ago. "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." I exhaled slowly. No weapon. Not even a lawsuit crafted by greedy hands. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and thought of Margaret. She would have told me to stand with grace, to let truth be my shield. And though she wasn't here to put her hand on mine, I could almost feel her presence in the quiet, steady as ever. The next morning I rose before dawn. I made black coffee strong enough to wake the dead and sat with that Bible again. This time I read longer, letting the words soak into me like mortar between bricks. Because that's what I needed: strength that held when pressure came. By the time the sun rose, I'd already decided I wasn't going to let bitterness eat me alive. I wasn't going to trade my peace for anger. They could throw accusations, they could lie under oath, they could twist my words. But I would walk into that courtroom with the truth, and with my head high. Later that day, Clara called with updates. Discovery would be brutal, she warned. Ethan and Madison's lawyers would try to paint me as senile, confused, unfit. They'd bring up every offhand comment I'd ever made about wanting my kids to be taken care of. Let them, I said. My voice surprised even me. It was steady without fear. Let them bring it all. I've got the records. I've got the facts. And I've got something they don't: faith that the truth will stand. She was quiet a moment, then said softly, "Howard, that might be the strongest weapon you have." That night I stood at my back porch, looking over the small patch of garden Margaret once tended. The wind was cool, the stars were clear, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt calm. Not because the battle was over, it hadn't even started, but because I knew where I stood. I whispered into the night, "Lord, walk with me into that courtroom. Don't let me waver." And I knew in my bones I wasn't walking alone. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, the kind of scent that tells you lives have been broken and mended within its walls. I walked through the metal detector in my best suit, the same gray one I'd worn to Ethan's college graduation, and for a moment, I couldn't help but remember that day. I'd been so proud back then. Today, that pride was gone. Inside the courtroom, Ethan and Madison sat at the plaintiff's table with their attorney, James Brennan. Brennan was a slick-looking man in his 40s, hair so perfectly styled, it looked lacquered suit, cut sharp enough to slice bread. He leaned in close to them, whispering strategies as though they were preparing to close some business deal. Ethan glanced at me, but it wasn't the glance of a son toward his father. It was the look of an opponent sizing up the enemy. Madison didn't bother looking at all. She was dressed in a black designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, dabbing at her eyes, with a tissue like she was the grieving victim in a tragedy play. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Patricia Henley entered, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. She sat tall, eyes sharp, her gavel striking once with a sound that silenced the room. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "you may proceed." Brennan rose smoothly. "Your Honor, this case is simple. My clients Ethan and Madison Whitaker were led to believe by Mr. Whitaker, their father, that he would assist them with purchasing their first home. He made repeated verbal commitments, creating reasonable expectations of financial support. Based on those promises, they entered into a purchase agreement. His sudden refusal has caused them severe emotional and financial distress." He gestured dramatically toward Ethan. "We will show that his promises were clear, repeated, and reliable. And we will show that Mr. Whitaker's refusal constitutes a betrayal of family obligation." Judge Henley nodded. "Very well, call your first witness." Ethan took the stand. He looked nervous at first, shifting in his seat, but once Brennan began guiding him, the performance began. Ethan Brennan asked, "Did your father ever indicate he would help you purchase a home?" "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "Many times. At family dinners, birthdays, holidays. He always said he wanted us to have a place of our own, that he'd make sure we were taken care of." "And how did you interpret those words, as promises?" Ethan said quickly. "I trusted my father. He told us he would be there for us financially." I clenched my jaw. Lies smooth as butter. Then it was Madison's turn. She walked to the stand with her tissue sniffling for effect. "Mrs. Whitaker," Brennan said gently, "can you describe how this has affected you?" Madison's lower lip trembled. "It's been devastating. We found our dream home. We planned our future there. We believed his word. And then at the last moment he turned his back on us. I don't sleep. Ethan's lost weight. We feel abandoned." She dabbed at her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. Brennan leaned closer. "Did Mr. Whitaker ever encourage you to look at houses beyond your means?" "Yes," she said, nodding earnestly. "He told us not to worry about money, that he'd handle it. That's why we thought we could afford it. It was theater. Every word rehearsed, every sniffle perfectly timed." From my table, I watched the judge's face. She kept her expression neutral, but I noticed her pen moving, jotting notes during the most dramatic parts. Whether she believed them or not, I couldn't yet tell. Finally, Brennan rested his case for the plaintiffs. "Your Honor, this is a matter of trust, of family, of a father breaking sacred promises. We believe the evidence will show Mr. Whitaker is responsible for the damage caused to his son and daughter-in-law." Judge Henley turned to Clara. "Defense." Clara rose slowly, a stack of folders in her hands, her calm presence filling the room. "Your Honor," she said, her voice even and clear, "what we have just heard is a story crafted for sympathy. But what we will show is something very different, a documented pattern of manipulation, entitlement, and financial irresponsibility. And unlike the plaintiffs, we have evidence." She placed the first folder on the table with a quiet thump. And at that moment, I knew the tide was about to turn. Clara adjusted her glasses, flipped open the first folder, and walked toward the bench with a measured calm that carried more weight than any theatrical sob. "Your Honor," she began, "the plaintiffs would have this court believe they are victims of broken promises. But what they've given you are only words, no written agreements, no contracts, no proof beyond their own testimony. What we will present today is evidence, hard evidence that tells a very different story." She turned to the judge and then to the jury box. Exhibit A recorded conversations. With a nod, she pressed play on a small recorder. Ethan's voice filled the courtroom, shaky but clear. "We never thought you'd fight the lawsuit. Our lawyer said most elderly people settle rather than go through the stress of court." The words hung in the air like smoke. Madison's face went pale. Exhibit B. Clara continued calmly sliding glossy photographs onto the evidence table. Social media posts from the plaintiffs themselves dated within the past 3 months. The screen flickered as photos appeared. Madison in a 5-star spa in Scottsdale sipping champagne. Ethan posing beside a brand new BMW. A Valentine's Day dinner receipt from a Dallas steakhouse where the bill alone was over $900. Clara's voice was steady, almost surgical. While claiming poverty to family and community, they maintained a lifestyle far beyond their means: vacations, luxury vehicles, designer handbags, all while carrying over $62,000 in credit card debt. And yet they ask this court to believe they were misled into buying a house they could not afford. Madison shifted in her chair, her hand tightening around the tissue, but this time no tears came. Ethan's eyes darted to Brennan, whose jaw was set tight. "Exhibit C," Clara said, lifting another stack of papers. Voicemails and text messages transcribed and time-stamped. She read aloud, "You owe us this, Dad." Another, "Don't expect us to keep pretending we want you around if you won't help us." And then Madison's voice in a text. "You're a selfish old man who will die alone with your money." The jury shifted uncomfortably. Even the bailiff raised his eyebrows. "Your Honor," Clara concluded, "these are not the words of children abandoned by their father. These are threats. These are manipulations designed to pressure an elderly man into surrendering his financial security. We submit that this case is not about promises broken. It is about greed." Judge Henley leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, do you have a written contract, a recorded statement, any objective evidence to substantiate your client's claim of a $500,000 promise?" Brennan cleared his throat, his voice suddenly less confident. "Your Honor, family agreements are often verbal," and the judge cut him off. "That is not what I asked. Do you have any evidence beyond the testimony of your clients?" Silence stretched across the courtroom. Brennan glanced at Ethan and Madison, but their faces had gone pale. "No, Your Honor," he admitted finally. The judge sat back, expression hardening, then proceed carefully. "This court deals in facts, not fantasies." Clara nodded once and returned to our table, sliding the folders neatly into place. She leaned toward me and whispered so only I could hear. "They just lost the ground under their feet." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in weeks: vindication. The truth wasn't just mine anymore. It was in the open, undeniable, written into the record of the court. Across the room, Madison looked like she was about to collapse. Ethan ran a hand over his face, his confidence leaking away with every second. The proud front they had put on the designer clothes, the carefully rehearsed tears, was crumbling under the weight of their own words and actions. And me, I sat straighter in my chair. For 72 years, I'd built houses that could withstand storms. Now I was watching the storm tear apart the flimsy structure of lies my own son had built. The gavel struck. "We'll reconvene tomorrow morning," Judge Henley said sharply. Court adjourned. As the bailiff called the room to rise, I stood with a steadiness that came from more than just age. It came from truth, from faith, from knowing I had fought back with dignity. and I knew the worst of their performance was over. Tomorrow the judgment would come. The next morning, I walked back into the courthouse with a calm I hadn't felt in months. The weight that had pressed on my shoulders was still there, but it was lighter somehow. Maybe because I knew the truth wasn't mine alone anymore. It had been spoken, recorded, and laid bare for the court to see. Ethan and Madison were already seated when I entered. They looked smaller than they had the day before. Madison's perfect hair was pulled back in a hasty bun, and Ethan's suit, still tailored, now seemed to hang loose on his frame. He avoided my eyes. Judge Henley entered promptly at 9, gavel striking sharp against the wood. The courtroom fell silent. "I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties," she began, her tone clipped and stern. "And I must say I am deeply troubled by what I have seen." She adjusted her glasses, her gaze fixed on Ethan and Madison. "The plaintiffs have provided no written agreement, no contract, no objective evidence that Mr. Whitaker ever promised them $500,000. What they have provided is testimony contradicted by their own behavior. The defense has presented recordings, transcripts, financial records, and social media posts that clearly demonstrate a pattern of manipulation, financial irresponsibility, and deliberate misrepresentation." Ethan's head dropped. Madison's knuckles turned white as she gripped the edge of the table. Therefore, Judge Henley continued, "This court dismisses the plaintiff's claims with prejudice. Furthermore, I am granting the defendant's counterclaims for defamation, harassment, and abuse of process. The plaintiffs are ordered to reimburse the defendant's legal fees in the amount of $31,000 plus an additional $20,000 in damages." Madison gasped. Ethan's face drained of color. "And one more thing," the judge said, her tone sharper than a blade. "This court is referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of possible perjury. Lying under oath is a felony. I do not tolerate fraud in my courtroom." The gavel fell. Case dismissed. For a moment, no one moved. Then Clara leaned close and whispered, "It's over, Howard. You won." I sat still, letting the words sink in. I hadn't just defended my savings. I had defended my name, my integrity, my dignity. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved in my face. "Mr. Whitaker, how do you feel about the ruling?" one asked. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I feel justice was served. Families should be built on love and respect, not manipulation and greed. I hope this reminds people that standing firm, even when it costs you, is worth it." The crowd buzzed with more questions, but I didn't linger. I'd said enough. Word spread through the town faster than wildfire. By the time I walked into Murphy's Hardware that afternoon, Tom Murphy himself clapped me on the back. "You showed them, Howard. Coffee's on the house as long as you live." At the grocery store, the cashier who'd once looked at me with suspicion now leaned across the counter and whispered, "I'm sorry for believing their lies. You didn't deserve that." Even Father McKenna from St. Mark's shook my hand after Sunday service. "You carried yourself with dignity, Howard. Your parents would be proud." Meanwhile, Ethan and Madison's downfall unfolded in plain sight. The house they'd boasted about went back on the market within a week, the bright red "for sale" sign staked in the front yard like a scarlet letter. The BMW was repossessed in broad daylight, neighbors watching from behind their curtains. Madison's social media accounts vanished overnight, her curated life erased with a few clicks. Through acquaintances, I learned Ethan had lost his job. His employer didn't appreciate the negative publicity or the whispers about perjury. Madison retreated to her mother's house in Houston. The glamorous couple who had once strutted around town were now a cautionary tale whispered about in grocery aisles and coffee shops. And me. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe. I no longer woke in the night, wondering what they'd try next. No longer felt my phone buzz with threats disguised as pleas. My notebook full of evidence sat on my desk, not as a burden, but as a reminder: truth matters, and it holds. One evening, I sat in my garden, the Texas sun setting low, painting the sky in strokes of gold and crimson. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the crickets. My hands rested on Margaret's old Bible in my lap. "You were right," I murmured, looking toward the horizon. Grace and truth. That's all I needed. The fight had been brutal. It had cost me peace, sleep, and the last shreds of illusion I had about my son. But it had given me something greater: clarity. The line between love and enabling had been drawn sharp and permanent. And I knew this much. My story wasn't about $500,000. It was about dignity. About refusing to bow to lies, even when those lies wore the faces of the people you once loved most. The garden around me seemed quieter, more peaceful. The storm had passed. In the days after the trial, my house felt different. Quieter, yes, but not the heavy quiet of loneliness. It was the peace that comes after a storm when the thunder has rolled past, and the air feels clean again. I spent my mornings in the garden, knees in the soil, hands steady, as I planted rows of tomatoes and peppers. The earth was rich and dark, and I thought to myself how honest it was. Dirt never lies. You put in the work, you reap the harvest. That's the way life was meant to be. Every evening, I'd sit on the porch with Margaret's Bible in my lap, just as I had during the darkest weeks of this ordeal. The words that once felt like distant promises now felt alive, pulsing with truth. One verse in particular echoed through me. "The truth shall set you free." Free, that's what I felt. Free from manipulation. Free from the burden of being seen as nothing more than a bank account. Free to live the rest of my years in dignity, knowing I had drawn the line and refused to step back. I won't lie to you. Losing my son in this way hurt more than I can say. Watching Ethan sit across from me in a courtroom lying under oath will always sting like an old wound. But sometimes love means refusing to enable destruction. Sometimes protecting what you've built means letting go of those who would tear it down. And through it all, my faith carried me. Not because it made the battle easier, but because it reminded me I wasn't walking it alone. Every prayer whispered in the stillness of night steadied me for the next day. Every verse reminded me that dignity is worth defending even when the cost is high. Neighbors still stop me in town to shake my hand, to apologize for believing Ethan and Madison's lies. The community that once turned cold now greets me with warmth, and I tell them all the same thing: don't be afraid to say no even to the people you love most. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're protection. Looking back now, I realize this story was never really about money. It was about choice. The choice to stand firm when it would have been easier to bend. The choice to protect integrity over comfort. The choice to trust that truth in time always rises to the surface. And maybe that's the message you need tonight. Maybe someone in your life is trying to guilt you, pressure you, or twist the truth to make you feel small. If that's you, let my story be a reminder you don't owe anyone your peace. Hold the line. Stand in the truth. And don't be afraid to walk away when respect is no longer offered. The sun set over my garden, casting the rows of young plants in golden light. I closed my Bible and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. You carried me through." Then I leaned back, breathing in the stillness, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. And before I close, let me ask one last favor. If this story touched you, follow Brian Stories so you won't miss the next one, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that truth and dignity are worth defending. Your support keeps these stories alive, and it means more than you know.